On the high-speed train. My 4-year-old son was talking in a low voice. The girl in the front row suddenly stood up and scolded loudly. "It's so noisy. Can the parents control this naughty kid?" My son was so frightened that he burst into tears. I argued with her, but was met with even more fierce attacks. The aunt whom I had refused to change seats with when getting on the train cursed me. "You don't respect the elderly. It serves you right that the retribution falls on your son." The strong man who was talking loudly on the phone roared at my son, who was frightened to cry. "Are you howling for the dead? Don't get in the way of my business." Other passengers, not knowing what was going on, pointed their fingers at us, mother and son one after another. Considering that we were in a weak position, I let it go to avoid trouble. But my son was frightened by that incident on that day. His condition worsened, and he had a high fever for a whole month continuously. Finally, he died of pneumonia. I was in extreme pain and died in a car accident while walking dazed on the street. When I opened my eyes again, I was leading my son towards carriage No. 7 of the high-speed train. When I felt his chubby little hand in my palm, my tears welled up instantly. Before Asher passed away from illness, he was so emaciated that only skin and bones were left. When I was staying in the hospital with him, I had prayed to God countless times, just hoping that he could gain some weight. Now, his fair and tender little hand was really held in my palm, alive and warm. "Mom." Asher looked up at me with a hoarse voice, his big, black and shiny round eyes blinking. "Why are you crying? Are you worried about Asher's illness?" "Don't worry, Mom. I'm very good and obedient, and I'll get well soon." I wiped away my tears and kissed him on the cheek. "Mom is happy. Asher, you will surely get better. Mom won't let you get hurt again. This time, Mom will definitely protect you." When walking into carriage No. 7, I looked in the direction of row 12 at first sight. Sure enough, Ophelia in a bright red dress was sitting steadily in seat F by the window, cracking melon seeds. The same scene, the same people. In my previous life, Asher caught a cold when he went back to his hometown to visit his relatives. I was worried that he would feel uncomfortable during the 5-hour high-speed train ride. So I deliberately waited for several days and finally bought 2 seats. DF. But when getting on the train, I found that seat F was occupied by this Ophelia. I politely took out my ticket to remind her, but she frowned and said impatiently, "Isn't it the same wherever you use it? I'm also in row 12. Besides, who can prove that this seat is F instead of B?" I pointed to the sign on the train wall to explain to her that her 12B should be in the middle of the 3-seater on the opposite side. She spat out a melon seed shell and raised her voice. "How can you be so fussy at such a young age? Don't you know how to respect the elderly? Whoever comes first gets to sit first." Seeing that I couldn't make it clear, I called the flight attendant. She wrangled for a while and finally got up reluctantly and went back to seat B. Later, when the girl in the front row accused Asher of making noise and quarreled with me, she was the first to jump out, fanning the flames, adding fuel to the fire, and telling a distorted version of the story to other passengers who didn't know the situation. Finally, in the chaos, she gave Asher a hard slap on the waist, which made him cry louder and louder. It was not until I got home later and saw a bruise on Asher's waist that I knew she had secretly done such a dirty trick. At this moment, I led Asher to walk over and stopped beside her. "Hello, my seats are 12DF. Are you sitting in the wrong seat?" I looked at her and asked slowly. Ophelia looked up from the pile of melon seeds, looked at us, mother and son, with her small eyes, quickly made a judgment, frowned and said impatiently, "Isn't it the same wherever you use it? I'm also in row 12. Besides, who can prove that this seat is F instead of B?" I pointed to the sign on the train wall to explain. As in my previous life, she shouted loudly, "Don't you know how to respect the elderly? Whoever comes first gets to sit first." I nodded, said nothing more, and then turned to ask the young man in 12C, who was watching a movie with earphones on, if he could change seats. Both were aisle seats. And D was obviously less disturbed than C. Without a second thought, he directly held his computer and sat in seat D. My son and I sat in seats B and C. Ophelia glanced at me while cracking melon seeds, looking very proud. And my eyes were looking at the connection part of the carriage. At the short-haired girl who was slowly walking in while pulling a suitcase. This person who called herself the high-speed train judge in my previous life. Too, she was lively and pretty, with a high-spirited posture. She had a Bluetooth earphone on her ear and was holding a mobile phone in her hand, saying something into the camera while walking. I lowered my eyes, opened my mobile phone, and clicked into a live streaming room named Social Ava. I only learned later that she was a small-scale internet celebrity with 300 followers. In my previous life, when the argument happened, she was live streaming the whole process. Mom, my throat is itchy. It's time to drink water, Asher reminded me in a hoarse and gentle voice. Before setting off, I had deliberately and carefully instructed him, don't run around in the carriage. Don't play the external sound when watching tablet cartoons. Children can't talk loudly at will. Asher tilted his head and asked curiously. Children can't do this. What about adults? Adults are the same. Mom, I understand. Asher will be the same as adults. I took out the thermos and let him drink some water. He lowered his little head again, covered his mouth with his two little hands, and coughed softly twice. And then blinked his big, black and shiny eyes and asked me in a low voice, Mom, was my voice just now loud? No. Then when my throat is so itchy that I can't bear it, can I cough like just now? Mom, I only need to cough twice each time, and it will be okay. My eyes became moist. Yes. Asher is so good. After calming down, I looked at the short-haired girl who was looking for her seat, while shaking her head. And the scenes that made me regret countless times flashed through my mind. In my previous life, just these few small sentences and a few coughs made her, who was sitting in the front row, scold loudly. It's so noisy. Can't the parents control this naughty kid? When she suddenly stood up, the small table behind her shook violently, and the thermos cup fell down and hit Asher's leg. He cried out loudly on the spot because of the pain. While coaxing Asher, I retorted angrily. The child has been talking quietly and normally all the time. When did he disturb you? She pointed a finger at Asher's forehead, while he was crying loudly and said in a loud voice, Is this called being quiet? Isn't this noisy? Are parents all blind to their own children? If you want to spoil your child, do it at home. Society has no obligation to cooperate with you. Asher was frightened by her fierce expression, and couldn't stop crying. His throat was already uncomfortable, and the crying made him cough and vomit more. I was both angry and worried. I hurriedly took a tissue to wipe Asher, afraid of scaring my son. I could only suppress my anger as much as possible to communicate. He just asked me for some water and coughed twice. It was you who suddenly stood up and hit the child with your thermos cup that made him cry. Ada sneered. Oh my! Are you trying to shift the blame when you know you're in the wrong? Aren't you afraid that your child will learn from you if you're so mean? With a mother like you, I'm worried about your child's future growth. Don't become a scourge to society when you grow up, harming others and yourself. The passengers in the front and back of the carriage all stretched their heads to watch the fun. They didn't know what was going on. All they saw was a child crying loudly and two women quarreling. Ophelia in seat B suddenly spoke up loudly. Even an old person like me can't stand it. If the child disturbs others, just apologize and be more careful. But you don't admit it and wrong the young girl instead. It was so good when it was quiet before. You have to make such a big noise. Now the elderly and children are targeted by society. And it's people like you who cause it. As soon as these words came out, the spearhead was directly pointed at me. Those who were making phone calls, sleeping, and scrolling through short videos all frowned. And all kinds of accusing and disgusted looks fell on me and Asher. I turned to look at Ophelia, trembling with anger. How did I wrong her? It was clearly she who made a big noise first and wronged us. Ophelia shook her head as if in helplessness. Oh. Forget it. After quarreling with this one. You quarrel with that one. I'm an old person. I can't out-argue you. And I don't want to argue with you either. Don't disturb the other passengers. Eva glanced at her mobile phone. A sarcastic smile on her lips. And then continued to attack loudly. I'm really annoyed by people who bring such young children out for a trip. We are already tired from traveling by train. You can't control your child. And he is so noisy. When we say a few words to you, you say you are a vulnerable group. If you are so vulnerable, don't go out. If you have the ability, go take the business class seat. We suffer. And your child also suffers. Please. Can you stop coming out and causing trouble for society? She said these words neatly and crisply. Standing on the so-called moral high ground. Carrying some kind of inexplicable social hostility. And actually made some people cheer. The originally quiet carriage became noisy. When traveling outside, I'm afraid of meeting such unreasonable parents and annoying naughty children. So annoying. I wanted to take a nap. But I was woken up after just a short sleep. Can you make that child stop crying? It's still the young people nowadays who dare to speak. It depends on their generation to rectify society. I looked at Asher, who was shivering from crying in my arms, and then at the accusing eyes around me. I closed my eyes and tried my best to suppress the anger surging in my chest. Asher's father passed away on business 3 years ago. This time, I took him back to his hometown to visit his grandparents whom he hadn't seen for 2 years during the short holiday. Because he has no father's company since childhood. Asher is more timid than his peers. He is cautious when getting along with anyone. And has a bit of a people-pleasing personality at a young age. At this time, although he didn't understand why he was suddenly scolded, he clearly felt the malice from the adults. Due to his personality, he thought he must have done something wrong, so he cried very furfully and remorsefully. Sorry, Mom. Asher is wrong. I will try my best not to cough. Mom. Don't quarrel. Asher is scared. He sobbed and apologized in my arms. Already sick. His small body couldn't stop shaking from crying. Although I was extremely angry. I knew that if I continued to argue reasonably and quarrel in this situation, it would only scare him more. Ava stood tall, glanced at me contemptuously, and said to her mobile phone, Look, in the face of social vices, we should dare to speak out. Dare to stand out. Today, I will be a high-speed rail judge once. The public has discerning eyes. If everyone is the silent majority, society will stagnate. Civilization will regress. And our Chinese people will always be looked down upon by the West. I calmed down, stopped looking at her, and gently coaxed Asher in my arms. Seeing that he was all dirty from crying and vomiting just now, I led him to stand in the corridor and wiped him bit by bit with a tissue. Asher's mood gradually stabilized, and his crying gradually subsided. At this time, Ophelia got up to go to the toilet and passed by us. Asher burst into a heart-rending cry again. This cry was unusual. I was both worried and at a loss. Asher, what's wrong with you? His little face was flushed red from holding his breath, and he was out of breath from crying and couldn't say a word. The originally calm carriage exploded again, and many people showed impatient expressions on their faces. Lucian, who had been making a phone call in the back row, roared at Asher, Are you howling for a funeral? Don't interfere with me doing business. I was frightened by Asher's unusual cry. Ignoring Lucian's roar, I led him to sit down and kept stroking his back to help him catch his breath. But his body was still twitching and couldn't stop. Lucian was sitting behind Asher. Furious. He kicked the back of the chair hard several times and cursed, Cry your fucking ball. If my $1 million business is screwed up, I won't let you off even as a ghost. Asher trembled with fright, and his face suddenly turned pale. His voice stopped abruptly, and because he was trying hard to hold it in, his whole body began to shake. I panicked. Asher, Don't be afraid. Mommy is here. Don't scare mommy like this. Some passengers couldn't bear to watch it any longer. The child is so young. There's nothing we can do if he cries. Just bear with it. Yes. Don't frighten the child. I saw that this child was very quiet at first. Don't be so irritable. Lucian turned around and glared at them. Will you compensate for my losses? Come on. If you have the guts. Come to me and say that. The person who had spoken shut up. Ava said sarcastically, this society is really strange. People who dare to speak out become the target of public criticism. You sit so far away and act as good people when it has nothing to do with you. When something really happens to you, do you think you can stay out of it? Ophelia came back from the toilet. When she was about to sit down, she looked at me and said in a low voice, with a trace of malice flashing in her eyes, you don't respect the elderly. You deserve it that your son is the one to suffer the retribution. During the rest of the journey, I really didn't have the strength to argue with those people anymore. Also, I was worried that Asher would make any more noise and be attacked. So I swallowed my pride and took him to sit at the junction of the carriages. That night, when we got home, Asher began to have a fever and talk nonsense. And in the following month, his condition continued to worsen and developed into severe pneumonia. I tried every possible method, sought help from traditional Chinese medicine and Western medicine, and even prayed to all the gods and Buddhas. But it was all in vain. When he left me, his body was so thin that it was just a small lump. His pale little face was sleeping quietly. All the doctors and nurses were in tears. Later, when I went to the crematorium to go through the formalities, I was walking in a daze when I heard two young girls pointing at me and whispering, isn't this the mother of that naughty child in Ava's live stream? Which naughty child? The one who was judged by Ava on the high-speed train. I looked up blankly, walked forward, and explained earnestly, you are wrong. Asher is not a naughty child. The two girls frowned and avoided me as if I were a plague. I staggered to chase them, but was hit by a speeding motorcycle. The back of my head hit the ground and I died on the spot. Perhaps during that extremely painful month, my extremely sincere pleas and prayers moved the heavens. It gave me a chance to start all over again. On a bright day, I was sitting in carriage No. 7 of this high-speed train again. I could hear my heart beating and my blood flowing. Maybe no one was a direct executioner, but everyone was a participant. An abuser. It was every small evil that together formed a great evil. My eyes slowly swept around. This time, you will all pay the price. None of you can escape. For my eyes first locked on Ava. She was arguing with a foreign person who was watching short videos. In my previous life, it was the same. Both of them said that their seats were 11F and showed their tickets to prove it. When Ava carefully looked at the other person's ticket, Thorne became impatient. Isn't it just a duplicate ticket? Go find the flight attendant. Don't be so whiny here. Later, Ava found that Thorne's ticket was for the opposite train. Immediately, she pointed it out loudly and sarcastically taunted Thorne. When Thorne hurriedly rushed out with his suitcase, she let out a proud laugh behind him. At this time, I was quietly watching Ava. She carefully looked at the ticket, and suddenly the corners of her mouth curved up. Obviously, she had found the problem again. Don't swipe away. Babies. He got on the wrong train. Let me show you how to make him flee in a hurry. She whispered excitedly into her earphone. I immediately sent a rocket in her live stream, which attracted her attention. And then I sent a message. This man is so rude. He can also be considered a public hazard. We should think of a way to teach him a lesson. She raised her eyebrows and asked with great interest, Baby, do you have any good ideas? I lowered my eyes and typed, the train is about to leave soon. Why don't we wait until the train starts moving before telling him? Ava blinked, and gradually there was a glint in her eyes. Instantly, the live stream became excited. Great idea. Want to see someone being slapped in the face? Want to see a real-life cool story? Yes. Why should someone else's mistake cause trouble for others? People like this should be taught a lesson. Some people also asked, that man looks tough. What if he gets angry and causes trouble for the anchor? Avra's eyes moved to the man's tattoo, and a trace of hesitation showed on her face. I immediately sent a message. Why are there so many people in our live stream? Isn't it because we admire the anchor for daring to rectify social order and deal with those who cause trouble to society? If we cower at this little thing, won't we be unworthy of the title of Ava? Group will is very easy to be influenced. As soon as I sent this statement, there were a lot of one scrolling below. Ava pursed her lips and made up her mind. Babies. This man has extremely poor quality. He is probably a villain in real life as well. Just take this opportunity to teach him a lesson. She whispered into her earphone, returned the ticket with a half smile, and then leaned against the back of the seat, neither speaking nor moving. The man snorted coldly and continued to watch the video. The volume was so loud that it even drowned out the noise in the carriage. 2 minutes later, the high-speed train started on time. Asher excitedly watched the scenery, slowly receding outside the window. His little face leaned over and said affectionately, Mommy, the train is leaving. I smiled gently. The train is leaving, and the good show is starting too. Fide's sister flight attendant. I need help. Ava suddenly raised her hand and shouted loudly towards the front. All the passengers looked back blankly. Someone is sitting in my seat. Please come and deal with it. The flight attendant walked over. Who is sitting in your seat? Ava pointed at Thorn. He? Thorn looked up and saw a finger pointing straight at his forehead. He was furious and cursed. Fuck you. Are you never going to stop? Sir, let's talk calmly. Don't swear as soon as you open your mouth. The flight attendant didn't tolerate it either and directly rebuked him. It's okay. I won't argue with an ill-mannered person. Ava smiled and handed over her ticket. Flight attendant's sister. 11F is my seat. The man also took out his ticket while muttering curses. I'm the one for 11F. Your railway sold the ticket twice. Whoever arrives first gets to sit. I don't give a damn about your mother. When the flight attendant checked the tickets, Ava smiled slightly at the man and said leisurely, Uncle, 11F is 11F. But other things may not be so certain. What? Thorn was impatient. Stop blabbing at me. You've got on the wrong train. You should have gone to the opposite platform just now. This train is in the opposite direction. The flight attendant looked up and handed the ticket back. Thorn's eyes widened. He snatched the ticket. And after seeing it clearly, he was stunned and shouted, Stop the train. I want to get off right now. Ava laughed out loud and said loudly, Do you think the high-speed rail is run by your family? It can't stop just as you say. Have you got any common sense? A burst of laughter rang out in the carriage. There are all kinds of people. He thinks he's on a bus. It's so funny. Stop the train? Why doesn't he ask the high-speed rail to take him back? Quickly get your luggage and get off at the next stop. The flight attendant reminded. Thorn was both embarrassed and angry. His temples twitched. Helplessly, he took his luggage from the rack. Suddenly, I sighed softly. TSK. Young people are still more calm and ruthless. If it were me, I couldn't help but say it as soon as I found out. How could it be so satisfying? Thorn was stunned for a moment. He turned to look at Ava and glared at her and asked, Did you do it on purpose? You knew that I got on the wrong train and deliberately didn't say anything until the train started moving? Ava raised her eyebrows. Finally, unable to hold back her gloating heart, she said loudly with sarcasm, It was clearly you who got on the wrong train. Why are you blaming me? I kindly reminded you that the seat was mine. If you had been more polite, that would have been all right. After all, this is a harmonious society. But you cursed and swore, insisting that the ticket was sold twice. Then I have no obligation to correct your mistake for you. Thorn stared at her, his eyes showing a fierce look, and his hands clenched slightly. The flight attendant, who was well experienced, immediately said, "Don't cause trouble. Otherwise, you won't be able to get off the train later, and will delay yourself." The muscles on Thorne's face twitched. He didn't say anything more. With a sullen face, he carried his luggage to the connection between the carriages, preparing to get off when the train stopped. Ava sat down triumphantly, and her live streaming room was full of jubilation. So satisfying. Bad people should be punished. The anchor has high quality. She didn't say a single dirty word, and won completely. The train slowly pulled into the platform. I watched coldly on my mobile phone as Ava summed up her experience in high spirits. Some bad people seem tough on the surface, but they are actually paper tigers. The more you're afraid of them, the more energetic they become. So don't be cowardly. Dare to stand up. Just as she was speaking, a figure approached and cursed roughly. "Bitch." Then there were a series of crisp sounds. Slap. 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 Thorne slapped Tiva several times hard and fast. After that, he left immediately. By the time everyone reacted, Thorne had already quickly got off the train with his luggage. In the live streaming room, Aval's bewildered and swollen face was left in the center of the screen. She was stunned for a few seconds. When she came to her senses, she was both ashamed and angry. Covering her face, she shouted, "Call the police. Call the police for me. Catch him." The passengers who witnessed the scene looked at each other in dismay. Thorne was long out of sight. "Little girl, it's useless even if the police come now. You'd better wait until you get off at the station and go to the police by yourself." That said, everyone knew that even if he was caught, it wouldn't be a serious matter at this level. Moreover, across different regions and provinces, the person who was beat and mostly had to accept their bad luck. Ava was aggrieved and embarrassed, and tears immediately flowed down. "Mom." Beside me, Asher called me softly. "That sister must be in great pain after being beaten. She's crying because of the pain. Can I go and hug her? Every time I fall and it hurts. You hug me and it doesn't hurt anymore." I gently stroked his tender face. "Asher, would it hurt if a cup hit your leg?" Asher blinked his round eyes and said strangely, "It should hurt a great deal." "But Mom." The cup didn't hit Asher's leg. "It's so good that Asher wasn't hit by the cup and didn't get hurt," I said gently. The people in the live streaming room were all comforting Ava. She seemed calm on the surface, but from my perspective, her hand on the table was still trembling uncontrollably. Obviously, she was frightened. She was just a young person who had just entered society. She hadn't experienced the complexity and blows of society. She had obtained psychological satisfaction, and even economic benefits in previous confrontations where she had occupied the moral high ground many times. So she thought that she always represented social justice, morality, and order. She thought she was invincible. It seemed that this was the first time she had received negative feedback because of her daring to rectify society. She was so lucky before. I thought. 6 beep. 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 It trained or closed. And the train set off again. The atmosphere in the carriage returned to being quiet and faintly noisy. I turned my eyes to the right. To Ophelia, who was nimbly cracking melon seeds with her fingers flying. The flight attendant pushed a cart over. I stopped her and took a box of cantaloupe and a bag of melon seeds. After taking care of Asher to start eating the cantaloupe, I opened the bag of melon seeds and started cracking them one by one. Crunch. Crunch. I cracked them quickly and loudly. In harmony with Ophelia. The young man in Unit 12C raised his head from a movie, somewhat irritably, and muttered. "Just finished arguing and still not quiet. Eating melon seeds is so noisy." Hearing this, Ophelia immediately responded. "Oh. Does your mother eat melon seeds without making a sound?" The young man looked left and right, sighed, and picked up his computer and walked to another carriage. I made eye contact with the aunt, and we both smiled at each other. "Auntie, do you want some more melon seeds?" I said enthusiastically. "Sure. Pour me some," the aunt said while her mouth kept moving. I got up and went over, pouring half a bag onto her small table. Thank you just now. The ant is too fat. And it was uncomfortable to sit in that middle seat. It's just right for your son to sit there. I smiled. It's okay. It's the same, wherever you use it. When I went back to my seat, I casually threw a few melon seed shells forward. Asher held out the biggest piece of cantaloupe with a fork. Mom, eating melon seeds can cause internal heat. Have a piece. My eyes felt hot. I remembered that during Asher's last days, when he was lying in bed all skin and bones, he still felt sorry for me. Mom, you should remember to drink more water and eat more fruits. These were all the things I had told him many times before, and little him had remembered them all. I ate the sweet cantaloupe and dope in the live stream room. In the picture, Ava was obviously not in such high spirits. She only reluctantly interacted with everyone's comforting words. Of course. I won't be beaten for nothing. I'll call the police as soon as I get off the train. I sent another rocket and commented, Ava, don't be discouraged. We all support you. She forced a smile. Thank you for your support, baby. Anchor. There are several melon seed shells on your head. Nedison, I just saw them. The sound of cracking melon seeds was so loud and noisy. It has been there since the beginning. I thought it was background music. Ava patted her hair irritably, and the sound of cracking melon seeds was still clearly heard. I just saw a hand throwing them from behind the seat. People nowadays are really uncivilized. Throwing things randomly on the high-speed rail. Ava, you should rectify this kind of behavior properly. Some people agreed, and some people opposed. The anchor has just had a fight. Don't cause more trouble. Ava touched the face that had just been slapped and looked hesitant. But don't we like the anchor because she dares to confront others head-on and is not afraid of the possible trouble? If she just talks about rectifying society, but is afraid of causing trouble, what's the difference from each of us? Then why are we still gathering here to watch? Most of the people in the live stream room liked to watch the excitement and were eager for more trouble. And immediately some people followed suit. Yes, that makes sense. Anchor, cheer up. Get back the aura you had just now. Fight one more time, and we will surely send you gifts. I moved my eyes away from my phone and looked at Ava in the position. 2 seconds later she suddenly stood up, turned her head, and said loudly to Ophelia sitting in the back row, "Can you stop throwing melon seed shells randomly when eating? This is a public place, not your home." I let out a soft sigh. Ava was performing steadily. Ophelia was stunned for a moment, blinked her big bean-like eyes, spat out the melon seed shells in her mouth loudly, and said in a high-pitched voice, "You are sitting in the front, and I am sitting in the back. Which eye of yours saw me throwing melon seed shells randomly? The anus at the back?" She deliberately paused here. Sure enough, low muffled laughter sounded around. Obviously, Ava didn't expect to face such vulgar words. Her already swollen face instantly became even redder, and she forced herself to say loudly, "Your melon seed shells spat on my hair." Ouch. The ant didn't give her a chance to speak at all and continued to rant. Am I a laser cannon mouth or a water snake squid hand? I was sitting properly eating my melon seeds. Why did I have to throw them on your hair? Why don't you say I threw them on your face? Oh, your face has just been slapped by someone. It's time to change the place. Ava had never seen such a situation before. She already felt ashamed after being slapped just now. And now her scar had been blatantly exposed. Her face was red and white in patches, and she couldn't say a word for a long time. I sneered in my heart. Her so-called moral judgment was only useful for moral people. For people like the ant who had no morals, it was worthless. How ironic. 7 You did throw them. Someone just saw it. Throwing garbage randomly on the high-speed rail. You are affecting others. Ava completely lost the sharp and aggressive momentum of her previous life and only said pale and powerless rebuttals. Suddenly, I said loudly, "You are lying. I'm sitting next to you and can't bear to watch it anymore." The aunt has been throwing melon seed shells into her own bag all the time. She hasn't thrown them randomly at all. You, a young girl, are young but wrongly accusing and bullying an old person for no reason. Why is your quality so low? When everyone heard this, they also expressed their dissatisfaction one after another, arguing with this one for a while, and that one for a while. It hasn't been long since the train started, and the whole carriage can hear her making noise. Why are young people so angry nowadays? Ava had always been in a position of having much support, but today she was not only beaten and scolded, but also wrongly accused, becoming the target of public criticism. For a while, she was so angry that she clenched her fist and trembled all over. Seeing that everyone was helping her, the aunt was even more complacent and said slowly, "Little girl, this is a public place, not your home. Not everyone will tolerate you. If your parents don't teach you, society will. No wonder you just got slapped. Besides, you are picky about this and that. If you are so delicate, why are you sitting in second-class seats? Why don't you go to first-class seats, or business-class seats? Is it because you can't buy tickets? Or..." The aunt glanced at Ava disdainfully and snorted. "You haven't sold at a good price and are out here going crazy." Ava widened her eyes. 1 second later, her anger finally broke through the critical point, and she cursed loudly. "Damn old thing. Fuck your mother." I frowned and silently covered Asher's ears as he was burying his head and eating melon, enjoying the drama. I've already broken down. In extreme anger, she threw herself onto the back of the chair again, and reached out to grab the auntie's hair. The tall and exquisite coiled hair was destroyed. Under the random rubbing and stirring of 2 hands, it collapsed into a withered and yellow mess like a chicken coop. The auntie roared and nimbly slapped Ava in the face. Slap! 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 3 slaps in a row. The other side of Ava's face also swelled up high, even more so than the previously swollen half. The auntie hit hard, and Ava was instantly stunned. All of them were young people who had been caused dead by their families and society. Where had they ever suffered such humiliation? She was stunned for a while. After being completely defeated in both verbal and physical confrontations, she actually chose to start screaming. Heart-rending, hoarse, and endless. The people in the carriage covered their ears one after another. Lucian, who was on the phone in the back row, roared, "Are you mourning? Don't delay me from doing business." The flight attendant and the railway police were called over and shouted loudly to stop Ava. But she, as if possessed, regardless of everything, continued to scream in an outburst of emotion. "You have seriously disrupted public order. This is your first warning." The railway police officer had a serious expression. Ava had already lost her reason and began to smash things, hitting the auntie and the flight attendant. "Second warning. Third warning." As soon as the words were spoken, the railway police officer took a quick step forward, neatly pressed Ava's hand behind her back and locked it. Ava was like a crazily bouncing grasshopper. Amidst the broken wails, she was forcibly removed from the carriage. The people in the carriage were stunned by the scene in front of them. I watched coldly as Ava was dragged away, and then looked down at my mobile phone. The live streaming room was being frantically swiped. Am I not blind? Is this Ava? So using foul language and throwing tantrums is her true face? She just attacked the police a moment ago. I've recorded the screen. It's ridiculous. The person who claims to rectify social order is actually the #1 offender who undermines social order. I can't believe I followed such a person. It's over for Ava. Cursing and attacking the police was streamed throughout. She will definitely be blocked, and may even be cyber-bullied. I'm not adding insult to injury. I actually know her. She is an employee in the accounting firm that my company cooperates with, named Guanwan. The picture changed, and a prompt indicating that the live streaming room was blocked popped up on my mobile phone. I curved the corners of my lips. The rest depends on how the netizens play and her own fate. Mom. I closed my eyes briefly and then turned my head with a smile. Asher's little face was puffed up with anger as he criticized unhappily. That sister was too noisy and even hit the police. Asher doesn't want to learn from such an adult. I lowered my head and kissed his forehead. Asher is absolutely right. Carriage 8 returned to calm. Half of the journey had passed. The passengers were a little tired, and the voices of chatting and swiping mobile phones were much quieter. Some people were taking a nap leaning on the back of their chairs. The only loud sound source was Lucian sitting in seat 13D, who had been talking loudly on the phone all the time. I tilted my head, looked at him and the woman sitting beside him, and then slowly closed my eyes, lost in thought. Put your chair back. A rough voice sounded impatiently, which was extremely abrupt in the dull carriage. I suddenly opened my eyes. It turned out that Ophelia was about to go to sleep and had put the back of her chair to the lowest position, which had caused Lucian's dissatisfaction. The auntie shuddered all over. She was about to passionately retort, when she looked back and saw the appearance of the man behind her. A stand-collar polo shirt, taut muscles, and a thick chain. Her rich life experience made her quickly make a judgment that the person in front of her was not someone to be trifled with. Her face changed several times, and she suppressed the words that were almost on the tip of her tongue, but still retorted without showing weakness. What does it have to do with you if I put my chair back? You're not sitting behind me anyway, Lucian said roughly. It's my wife sitting behind you. Do you think it has something to do with me or not? Sitting beside him was a round-faced woman with glasses. She had a cold and quiet temperament, and looked much younger than the man. She waved her hand. Forget it. Don't quarrel. The man was about to say something more when a middle-aged woman stood up behind him, and said considerately, Teacher Aubrey, your body is precious now. There's no one sitting next to me, so it's spacious. Shall we change seats? Teacher Aubrey hesitated for a moment, then nodded and got up. Sister Nerissa, sit next to him and keep an eye on him for me. Don't let him get angry so easily. Sister Nerissa wiped past the man's legs and sat down, smiling and saying, Don't worry, Teacher Aubrey. I'll keep an eye on him for you. She was talking with a smile on her face while at the same time pulling the man's hand onto her leg and lifting her skirt hem to cover it at the same time. The man straightened his waist imperceptibly, and let out a barely audible sigh. At this time, Ophelia felt that she had the upper hand, and looked back triumphantly without any scruples. The man panicked. He lifted his leg and kicked the back of the front chair twice vigorously, and growled guiltily. What are you looking at? Put the chair back. The auntie was caught off guard. Her head hit the violently shaking back of the chair twice. She hissed while covering her head and was about to get angry when she looked up and met the man's fierce eyes. She shut her mouth, turned around, and adjusted the back of the chair to be upright. Teacher Aubrey reminded from behind, Honey, be careful. The man covered up, his hands moving non-stop while answering, Yes, yes. I won't shout anymore. As for me, the reason why I could see so clearly was that my mobile phone was on selfie mode and aimed at the diagonally rear. Since the moment the woman named Nerissa got up and spoke, I suddenly remembered something. In my previous life, when How was in the most critical condition, I hid alone in the hospital corridor to pray. I accidentally witnessed a very similar scene between these two people. The two of them washed in hurriedly, and were indulging in their sordid affair self-obliviously. They didn't notice me at all. Kneeling motionless in the dark corner, I closed my eyes, immersed in my own sorrow, only hoping that they would finish quickly and leave. However, the two of them were flirting while doing their deeds. Teacher Aubrey won't find out, right? If this little nanny, get fired later. Little brother, you must compensate me. You're all ripened and still call yourself a little nanny. Teacher Aubrey's prenatal checkup is almost over. Hurry up and lift it up. When they left after finishing, by the faint glimmer of light, I recognized the man. He was exactly the one who had kicked Asher's seat violently on the high-speed rail. It was those kicks and those shouts that made Asher, who was already extremely frightened at that time, stop crying suddenly and have a stress reaction. Later, He was diagnosed with panic disorder by the doctor. As a result, when he was hospitalized, his limbs trembled many times. His face turned red and he was suffocated, which made me extremely distressed. It was them, one after another, bit by bit of evil adding up, that made a well-behaved and sensible little life fall tragically before it could bloom. They are not murderers, but perpetrators. They are equally to blame. 9 When intense emotions were surging in my body, there was a popping sound from the right. The aunt was roughly cleaning up the garbage on her table. She had a sullen face, with drooping eyebrows and eyes. Obviously, she was full of anger because she had just cowered in front of Lucian and had nowhere to vent. I got up and walked towards the bathroom. When I entered the bathroom, I left a small gap in the door, watching the aunt slowly coming over with a plastic bag of garbage. I started to make a loud phone call. Yes, she was sitting diagonally behind my seat. That mistress deliberately changed seats with the man's wife, and the two of them blatantly did some unsightly deeds. Auntie in the front row accidentally turned her head back, and that man deliberately flew into a rage. He was guilty, afraid of being discovered. The original wife was sitting right behind them at that time. Don't you believe it? I happened to take a picture of both of them when I took a selfie. I'll send it to you right now. Don't spread it out. When I opened the door and came out, I bumped into the aunt head-on. Her shrewd eyes rolled around twice, and her gaze fell on my mobile phone. I nodded to her as a sign, and she also forced out a smile. I washed my hands slowly. My mobile phone was unlocked and placed face up on the washed sand. When the door behind me clicked, I turned around and walked towards my seat. I forgot to take my mobile phone. 2 minutes later, when I was feeding Asher water, the aunt came over with my mobile phone. You left her mobile phone on the washed sand. I hurriedly thanked her repeatedly. She sat back in her seat with a strange smile, and suddenly snorted, and pushed her seat back violently. The two people who were doing something secretly behind were startled. They separated suddenly like frightened rabbits. In a flurry, guilty and embarrassed. Lucian saw what was going on clearly, and was instantly furious. He shouted out, "Damn it! Put your chair back." The sudden roar made the whole carriage tremble. At this time, the aunt was full of confidence. She leaned against the backrest leisurely and unreservedly used her tongue-lashing skills, shouting back loudly, "Why should I put it back? The chair is designed like this, which means that there is enough space reserved for the back. Besides, why can others do it but you can't? Could it be that you two are doing something in the back and don't have enough room for movement?" The two were poked at their ugly deeds and immediately became angry out of shame. Sister Nerissa spat, "You old woman. Your mouth is so dirty. You really don't respect your old age." The aunt cut in loudly, "Let the original wife sit at the back. And you two are so close without leaving a gap. Who is really dirty?" Everyone could tell that the aunt was insinuating these two people and in doubt of her words. For a while, everyone's expressions showed a gossip-seeking look. The man was extremely angry. Unable to win with words, he started to use his hands. He lifted his foot and kicked the aunt's chair back several times. "Damn old woman. Deliberately looking for trouble. You're tired of living." The aunt simply shouted louder, "Oh, this is a threat to me. Just because I exposed a little of your affairs? Are you going to kill me now?" Teacher Aubrey walked over, frowned and said, "Didn't I say don't make noise? Sister Nerissa, you should also persuade him a little. You'd better sit back." "I'll sit here." Sister Nerissa got up with an embarrassed smile and walked towards the back seat. I suddenly approached and whispered a reminder, "Sister, your skirt is tucked into your underwear." My voice was not loud, but it was loud enough for these people to hear. Sister Nerissa was stunned for a moment. She hurriedly pulled at her skirt, blushing and explaining randomly, "It was fine just now. How did it get in by itself?" Lucian subconsciously reached out to help, but then suddenly withdrew his hand, freezing in midair. Teacher Aubrey's face sank. The aunt got up to look, and immediately laughed opprobriously, ridiculing, "Paper can't wrap fire, and a monkey can't cover its red butt. This time you exposed your own flaws. It's not that an old woman, wronged you." Before she could finish her words, there was a dull thud of a fist hitting flesh. The ant's face was splattered with blood. Lucian raised his fist and said viciously, "Let you have a dirty mouth. I'll smash your mouth." The ant touched her own blood, stood blankly for 2 seconds, and staggered out, shouting, "Murder! The adulterer and the adulteress are murdering. Police! Come quickly!" She shouted earth-shattering lie. Even the people in the front carriage looked back this way. Lucian was on the verge of splitting his eyes. "Don't shout. Shut up." The ant still rushed forward like crazy. In his exasperation, Lucian kicked out violently and hit the ant's waist. The ant's body went limp and she fell straight forward. Suddenly, there was no sound and she didn't move at all. "Quick! Save her! Don't let her be seriously injured from the fall." Someone called for the flight attendant, and a passenger who claimed to be an emergency doctor also came running. People gathered around to give first aid, and the old lady slowly regained consciousness. She clutched her waist in pain and moaned ouch. Ouch a few times. Then she suddenly asked blankly, why can't I move my legs?" The emergency doctor was stunned for a moment, then immediately bent down to do a few movements while examining and asking questions. The old lady shook her head blankly. "I can't feel anything. What's going on?" The doctor slowly put down his hands, looking serious. "I'm afraid her lumbar spine is injured." Realizing something, the old lady asked shrilly, "What do you mean? Will I be paralyzed?" The doctor chose his words carefully and said, "It's hard to say right now. A comprehensive examination in the hospital is needed." 10 minutes later, when the train arrived at the next station, the old lady was carried off on a stretcher by the nurses who had been waiting in advance. When the train door slowly closed, her heart-rending cries could be heard. At the moment when Lucian threw his first punch, I blocked Asher's view. He only saw the old lady lying on the ground, clutching her waist and crying in pain. "Mom, Grandma's waist is injured. It must be very, very painful." Even Asher feels the pain. My heart tightened, and immediately I lifted his clothes to look for the place where he had been kinched purple in the previous life. Smooth, white and tender, without a single mark. I let out a sigh of relief. Asher asked, "Will that grandma get better?" I replied, "It depends on whether she is a good person or a bad person." Asher tilted his head and said earnestly, "Whether grandma is a good person or a bad person, I hope she will get well soon." Somewhat surprised, I asked gently, "Why?" He thought for a while and said, "Because Asher has been sick before. When sick, it was so uncomfortable. Asher doesn't want others to be so uncomfortable either." Suddenly, my tears couldn't be held back and gushed out. Such a pure and beautiful soul, after the end of the previous life, should have gone to heaven. Then suddenly there was a commotion behind, and Lucian's panicked voice rang out, "Wife, what's wrong with you? Don't scare me. Wife." I turned to look. Just now when the old lady was injured, after the railway police asked the passengers about what had happened, they took Lucian into control. He was stunned for a moment, knowing that he couldn't escape the blame, and gritted his teeth and said, "I'll pay whatever compensation is required at most." After that, the 3 people traveling together were arranged to sit together, preparing to go to the local police station at the station to receive punishment. But at this moment Teacher Aubrey was lying on the ground moaning in pain, and a winding stream of blood flowed out from under her white trousers. Lucian roared in panic, "Where is the doctor? Doctor, come quickly. My wife is pregnant. Save my son quickly." Seeing this, the railway police immediately turned around to call for people. People wanted to help, but dared not act rashly, only whispering and sighing. At this time, Lucian suddenly grabbed Nerissa's neck beside him and shook her violently. Why did you push her? You knew she was pregnant. Why did you push her? Nerissa's face turned pale. A mixture of panic and anger. And she also shouted crazily. She was the one who made the first move. She was the one who cursed me first. She also threatened to make trouble at my son's workplace. My son has just graduated and managed to enter a state-owned enterprise with great difficulty. I will never allow it. The doctor rushed over, examined and said, with this amount of bleeding, the baby may not be saved. Lucian roared and kicked Nerissa to the ground. His face distorted. If something happens to my wife and child, I'll take your life. Nerissa sat slumped on the ground, showing no sign of weakness. I'll see you for rape. The doctor sighed and comforted Teacher Aubrey. You are still young. Your body will recover quickly. Don't be too sad. Teacher Aubrey opened her eyes slightly, looked coldly at the man and woman cursing each other beside her, and said slowly, I'm not sad. It's a good thing that it wasn't saved. I withdrew my gaze and leaned my head against the back of the chair. I felt extremely calm inside. The train slowly entered the terminal station. Those 3 people were either carried or escorted, and were sent off the train first. Then, the passengers in the carriage stood up one after another. Some taking their luggage. Some talking. So many things happened one after another in this carriage today. It's really spooky. Indeed. Everyone is so full of hostility. It has become a social trend. Which is not good. The young man in 12th came back with his laptop under his arm, talking on the phone as he walked. When he saw that the seats in front, behind, left and right were all empty, he was stunned for a moment and continued. Yes. I watched a movie on the way. The name is Mulholland Drive. I sat in my seat, silently experiencing the different feelings of arriving at the station in this life. A soft body pressed against me, and a childish and bright voice rang out. Mom. My throat is better. It doesn't hurt at all. Listen. Can I speak very loudly now? Asher asked excitedly. I was extremely happy and hugged him tightly. Great. Asher's illness is cured. Mom is so happy. A middle-aged man who had been sleeping all the way in 12A stretched himself and said with a smile, this little guy is so cute. He was quiet, and didn't make any noise. He didn't disturb Uncle's sleep at all. Asher raised his chin proudly. I'm 4 years old. I'm very obedient. I can be like an adult. I held back my tears and gently flicked his little nose. Asher is better than many adults. The middle-aged man helped us take down our luggage, and Asher waved goodbye to him politely. Outside the train carriage, I was pulling my luggage with one hand and holding Asher with the other. Talking and laughing, we walked slowly forward. The setting sun gently enveloped the platform, stretching our shadows into 2 long ones. Someone brushed past us. So pitiful. There was so much blood on her head. Alas! Why did she catch up? I was slightly stunned and looked back blankly. The backs of the 2 young girls disappeared into the crowd. Mom! Hurry up. Asher is hungry and we need to go home quickly. I want to eat the meat rice made by Mom. Asher danced in the sunlight, with a big smile on his face. I turned my head and looked at the little him beside me. This time, he was full of vitality and lively. I smiled, feeling an indescribable joy flowing through every cell in my body. I was extremely satisfied and happy, wiping away the happy tears overflowing from the corners of my eyes. I said loudly, okay. Mom will take Asher home right now. Not far away. The afterglow of the setting sun covered the earth, painting the sky a warm yellow. Holding Asher's hand, I strode happily towards that light. The end.